Welcome to Integration, Strategies in Business for a World in Flux, where we explore the art of moving forward, not just sustaining, transforming. I'm your host, Samantha Jewel, and I hope you are as inspired by my guests as I am. They come from many different walks of life. The great ones among us do not see setbacks, only the landscape of possibilities. My guests have learned to navigate what is, to find ways to keep going and leave the world better than they found it, so that when the storm comes, they don't just endure, they lean into it. And on that note, I hope you enjoy my guest today. Hello and welcome. Today we are interviewing the wonderful Alan Williams from Understanding Ag. And Alan has an extraordinarily long history in very big space of cattle. I could paraphrase it, but I'm going to let Alan talk about the things he's most passionate about, because although he's done many things over a long time, I find my guests are usually mainly wanting to talk about the thing that they're in at the moment. So I'm going to start by saying welcome, Alan, and please just give a brief synopsis of what you think is the most interesting part of what you do, because my primary point in my podcast is to show resilience with people that are maybe doing something a little bit different and how they kept going, because it's really only coming into sort of space now for a lot of people, and others are going, oh my God, but the climate denial from Trump, there's a lot of problems with it, but actually it isn't as bad as everyone thinks. And I am trying to talk to inspiring people, which is why I have you on my podcast, and I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. So please, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be a part of the podcast.
Tell me a bit more about why you formed Understanding Ag, because I know you're working with Gabe and you've been doing stuff with the Carbon Cowboys. So tell me, how did you come about creating that?
Well, it's sort of a convoluted story, to be honest with you. I'm a sixth-generation family farmer and rancher, and my family's been on their place since 1840. So I grew up in agriculture and grew up, believing this is what I wanted to do with my life. But then often as things happen in life, you take twists and turns, and I ended up spending about 15 years in academia as a university researcher and professor, and doing things very conventionally and almost becoming convinced that was how we needed to do things. But then I began to have a few realizations and epiphanies along the way. And so about 25 years ago, I left the university and went back full time into farming and ranching. But I knew I had to do it very differently, that if I did it, conventionally, it just wasn't going to work well. And I was basically relegating myself to a life of debt and narrow margins and, everything else. So that led me to just a lot of trial and error, to be honest with you. I really didn't have at that time a mentor. There was nobody where I'm located here in Mississippi that was doing it. So I was an outlier.
So why do you think that you were able to do that? When I ask many farmers over the years, I've said, well, this is another idea, because I come across stuff, and I say, why don't you just trial something different? And they won't even trial a strip. They might have millions of acres, but they won't take any effort. So what do you think was it about your mindset that made you actually want to take a different turn?
Well, a lot of times there are three key things that lead to people not doing it, okay? And so I'll give you those three real quick and then tell you why I did what I did. The first one is lack of awareness and education. You can't begin to implement what you don't know and what you don't understand. And unfortunately, that's the case with way too many farmers and ranchers. They don't have enough awareness and education regarding regenerative agriculture principles and practices, and so therefore they don't know how to implement them within their context. So that's the first problem. The second problem, and this is very real in agriculture around the world, so Gabe and I have gone to many, many places around the world, and it's peer pressure, because it doesn't matter where you're located, what country you're in. Peer pressure among farmers and ranchers is very, very real. And if you start to do something different than your neighbors or your family or your friends, then you get a lot of talking behind your back, and all of that.
Ostracization. I get ostracized, pushed away.
Exactly. And then the third is just fear. And a lot of that fear, frankly, comes from debt load, because way too many farmers and ranchers are carrying, a level of debt, and many of them are carrying heavy debt, and they're fearful to change anything. And that's very ironic, because you would not be in debt if what you have been doing worked, right?
Yeah.
If it worked, you wouldn't be carrying all the debt. But because of the debt load that they're carrying, and they're so on the edge financially, they're afraid that if they do change anything and it doesn't work, then they're bankrupt, they're insolvent. So those are the principal reasons why a lot of people don't try it. I tried it, to be honest with you. And again, remember at that time, that was 25 years ago, I didn't really know what I was doing. We didn't know anywhere near what we know today. But I knew from my experience up to that point, and my experience as a university researcher and professor, that doing it conventionally was not going to work.
Have you seen it on other farms in your researches? But in your own situation, were you not in debt? Was that one of the reasons you didn't have one of those three conditions?
Well, I had all three.
Oh.
I didn't know what I was doing.
So you still took the risk.
but I knew I had to do something different or I would fail. I knew if I did it conventionally, I would fail eventually, and I would end up in a lot of debt first before I failed. And I didn't want to do that. So I had peer pressure. I had all my former colleagues at the university saying I was an idiot. Why are you doing that? I had neighbors and friends saying the same thing. But the only thing I had going for me was I was just very persistent. I refused to give up and to let it beat me. And so, again, just lots of trial and error. And over time, as I gained some measures of success, I began to be asked to consult and to go speak at various conferences and workshops, and that's where I met Gabe Brown. And lo and behold, Gabe had a story very, very similar to mine, right?
Yep, I know his story.
Yeah, exactly. And he was being laughed at, and he didn't really have a strong mentor. He was doing it by the seat of his pants. And so we connected pretty much right away because of that, because we had similar stories, but yet in very different environments. He in North Dakota and me in Mississippi. And I think
for those of us not in America, can you give us a little bit of a background as to what those two weather and land conditions are like that's so different?
Absolutely. So Mississippi is in the deep south, the Gulf South. So it's really more of a subtropical type environment, hot, humid, all of that. And of course, Gabe is in the northern Great Plains up there in North Dakota. So he had a very, very different environment, very cold, long winters. We basically don't have winter for the most part compared to them. And, they have very little humidity and that type of thing. And I'm sitting in a 50-inch rainfall area. He's in a 14 to 15-inch rainfall area.
I find that fascinating because a lot of people, I think, become very micro about their environment and they think everything from their viewpoint. I mean, I find that a lot about the American conversation a lot, as though the American situation were the entire planet. And it's the same with farmers, and I suppose it's this parochial thing. We get very used to our own viewpoint, and we can't imagine there's another viewpoint that's so utterly different. So that's great that you paired with such a different land situation, because we had similar with having the tropics. In Queensland's really our food bowl, and down here in the southern area we've got very different conditions. So we are like different countries often for the farmers. And I love to talk to people that have actually crossed all the different parameters and understand some principles actually apply no matter where you are, but just the different implementation. So I really think that's fantastic. And I met Gabe in Kansas. I saw him at a conference there. So I heard his story. I think he said the same story pretty broadly. His Dirt to Soil book is very widely known. I, of course, have known a lot of people doing stuff like what you guys talk about for probably 30 or 40 years. So in Australia, we've been doing things a lot longer, I think, possibly because our soils weren't as good across like such amount of land to take as many generations to destroy. And so we've lasted, I think you guys lasted longer because you had deeper soil, so you could poison it longer than we did.
Yes.
And we had more fragile soils and much stronger drought conditions to really see the impact faster. Because we did have 7% carbon in some places in Australia when the settlers first came here, and we'd be lucky to get 0.2% carbon in many parts of Australia here. So people don't realise what that probably means, the carbon thing, but it's really like loam or concrete, one could say, is the difference between the two of them. So tell me, so you met Gabe, you partnered with him. I can totally see why you guys bonded based on your two stories. So what was the first thing that you did then in terms of connecting and forming something together?
Yeah, so initially I was one of the founders of a conference called the Grass-Fed Exchange. And that was focused principally on the production of pastured proteins like grass-fed beef, pastured lamb, pork, all of those types of things. And then we had invited Gabe to speak there, and then Gabe joined me on the board of directors for the Grass-Fed Exchange, and so we got to know each other even better through that. And then I still remember, and it was in 2016, we had spoken at a conference somewhere. I don't remember the conference or even where it was, but I remember what happened. And we were at dinner that evening after speaking at that conference, and we were talking about, how do we get this word out, to more and more people? How do we educate more people so that we can impact more farmers, more ranchers in a broader landscape? And we finally looked at each other and said, well, why don't we do this together?
What a concept.
Yeah, and you've heard the story about people starting businesses on the back of a napkin, right? And that's what we literally did. We were sitting at the restaurant table, grabbed a napkin, and started outlining our vision. And that was the genesis of Understanding Ag. And we could have never envisioned at that point what would have happened between then and now, to the point that we're working on literally tens of millions of acres, and we are working all over the world. And just like you said earlier, this truly does work no matter what kind of environment you're in, no matter what your temperatures may be, no matter what your rainfall may be. None of that matters. These principles truly do apply anywhere in the world. The only thing that's different is the context. And so it's about applying the principles within every individual farm or ranch's context.
And that applies also with the different animals. I also work with farmers that don't have animals at all, and they work. Right. They still get similar results because they're working with the microbes in the soil, really, and the biological, I would call them the animals in the soil. So they've just got a different way of doing it. But do you find that whether you're working with people with animals or without, you can get them to understand the principles that you're speaking about?
Yeah, absolutely, we can. And again, just like you said, it's the principles applied within their context. So no matter what their agricultural enterprise may be, cropping focused, livestock focused, it doesn't matter. You can make significant progress. Now, that being said, I will say this. You will always make more rapid progress if you can incorporate animals.
Yeah, I've heard that.
They'll speed it up. But if you don't have them available, or you just simply don't want them, then you can still apply all of the other principles within your context and make good progress.
Yeah, I do love hearing that from different people, because I think that people fail to grasp that concept because we're pretty well stuck in paradigms, as we spoke about. And do you think that we're going back to the things that were problematic, i.e. the two other principles that, like, let's say you've got the knowledge now and you've got the resilience in yourself personally, but you've still got what I call tribal survival of the community are against you. And I know that that's why I've spoken to people and they're like, well, I'm isolated. If the women say no to me, I've got no one to talk to, and that's insanity material. So I fully appreciate why people don't change their way, because the group is survival and always has been. So do you think it's because you're getting enough numbers up now for that to not be such a isolated group thing? There's more group in you, let's say?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that we really focus on is helping to forge peer-to-peer connections and networks. That is very, very important. So even if you don't have, say, a neighbor or a family member or whoever that's supporting you, everybody needs support. And so we help with the workshops and academies and all of that we do, we help to put people together.
Marry them up with people.
Encourage that networking. So we provide mentorship and, again, that peer-to-peer networking, and that really does help people quite a bit.
Wonderful. Yeah. I know that Terry McCosker, who I interviewed just a little bit back, he did a similar thing with a part of his business called Executive Link, and he found it was often the women that were opposed to, even if the man wanted to try, they didn't want to change. And I think it's that group ostracization they don't want to experience, which is very profound. And I think some people are very fine with being alone, and others really rely on that community. So, and he did get, I mean, obviously some didn't want to do it anyway, but I think that's really important that you do that, particularly at the workshops, if people can drag their partners along, their significant other, and introduce them to people. And I always find in those conferences or any of those workshop stuff I've attended, it's the networking part that's so important. The dinners and, just chilling out and spending time. Well, from someone who's listened to the information a lot, I don't really need the information so much. The networking is always a really interesting part from my point of view. But I really think it's the whole experience for people to see they're not isolated. There is a community, and it's global, and it's growing, and you make money, and you stop being broke. You relieve all those pressures. Yeah, I ran into one of the early conferences I went to. There was a woman talking, and she said, well, people think they wonder why we don't do gambling or whatever it was. She said, we gamble millions of dollars every year when we put a crop in with seed. And you start to realize how much risk, they had like 30 staff and they were a really big operation. And you could see any change, even a little change, is such a big risk over a landscape, because people forget you're working with landscapes, large spaces. And, I suppose it's the thing that I got out of watching Carbon Cowboys with it was how gentle you were with the farmers at giving them minimal exposure just to try a little thing out. And one of those first farmers was, and I highly recommend people watching it if they haven't seen it, rootssodeep.org. They can download it. Is that the farmer could just try a little bit out if they had some cows with an electric fence, and just do a paddock and see what the cows did, and take it from there. And I thought that was really wonderful how you made it so accessible for everyone to come at it at their own pace. And that's really some of the critical thing I think that I got out of it was the approach that you guys took in all of that. And do you find that you're needing to be quite so gentle now, or are you getting more uptake where people are already knowing about you and reaching towards you because you've got so much online material for people to watch?
Well, it's still a combination. Yes, we have a lot that, they're still pretty new to the game, so to speak. And we do need to be pretty gentle with them. But then we have others that have been able to, they've watched the Carbon Cowboy series. They've probably seen Roots So Deep. They've read a lot of our stuff, listened to our podcasts, that kind of thing. And you can dive deeper quicker. with them. But see, that's all a part of this, is assessing where the individual is at the moment, and starting at that point, because that's also a part of their context. And so it's not just context in terms of the context of your land, the history of the land, your agronomic enterprises or whatever. It's also the context of the humans and their dynamics. Where are they at? So we're always assessing that and starting with them wherever they're at. We're assessing and evaluating their risk aversion. And one of the most important things by far, is that you've got to build their confidence. And so you've got to give them little victories to begin with, and so that's why I like to start a little smaller and that type of thing, so that they can build their confidence, they can have a victory, and now they're like, okay, wow, that worked. I'm ready to tackle something a little bigger, a little more aggressive, and then you just keep going with them. And that's one of the things I love so much about this, is that we get every day, we get to watch people grow within themselves. And we get to see those light bulbs going off, all of those aha moments, right? And share that with them. And to me, at this point, I'm almost like, why would you want to farm a ranch any other way? Because every other way is pretty dull and boring. This is exciting. Every single day, you're making new discoveries.
Are you doing much farm design with agroforestry, or stacking different enterprises in businesses?
Oh, yeah, we do a lot of that. So we do a lot of enterprise stacking. That may include, depending on the situation, agroforestry, silvopasture. What we do is any piece of land, any farm, any ranch, any station that we work with, we assess first where they're at, what is their current context. Then we determine what are the possibilities, what's the potential, right? And what can you add to what you're already doing that's going to further increase your rate of progress, and also is going to further increase your net revenue generation. So all of those are definitely things that we consider. And I have to ask people, where did we come to the point that we believe that on any given acre or hectare, we can only grow one crop or raise one species of livestock?
Monoculturing, yeah.
Right. Why? On our farm, personal farm, our goal is to have a bare minimum of 6 different revenue generating enterprises that touch every acre every year. That's our goal.
Interesting you say that. I had one guy I saw at a conference, a guy called Walkie. Anyway, he's very big in the PR area, but he did, that man had so much energy. He did everything you can imagine: vegetable growing, different types of animals, butchering, crops. Like, he did the entire system, like the entire logistics system, and then he kind of worked out what was too much for him to do. But I mean, he had a man with a mission, had so much energy, I couldn't believe it. But I think what I kind of got out of that was that people have a resonance with certain types of things. Some people just don't like animals, or some people just don't want to deal with people, or some people, they really want to deal with people. So it's a very specific thing to the person, and also their age, their means, how far away they are from a community centre, just so many aspects. So it's wonderful to see that you're doing that full design specific to the farm. I want to get back though to that time when you started out and made those decisions, because I think that it's that point of where the person is at and helping them get through points where they're at a low point, like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore, I'm in this sort of heavy point, and how you came about finding resilience to find another way. I mean, yes, you had a lot of education because you're a professor and you've got obviously an intelligence that goes along with that, but even with that aside, there's something in you that had that willingness to keep going against the all odds sort of thing. And so what is it that you could talk to about that?
So first, I would have to say I had to overcome my being a professor. Okay. So that's why I call myself a recovering academic. I had all of these encumbrances and baggage that I brought with me from being a university researcher. And I sort of had to get over that before I could really think like I needed to think. One of the things that really led me down that path was what my family did, okay, in those 6 generations leading up to me. So many of the things that I researched and that we were now saying we just had to have, right, to be able to use inputs, pharmaceuticals, supplements, on and on and on, that we just couldn't get along without. We absolutely had to have. I began to realize, well, they didn't exist when my family, for many generations of my family, they're on the farm. And yet the farm always supported multiple generations. We almost always had 4 generations living on the farm at all times. And how in the world did it support all of those families, all of those generations for all of that time? And yet today, and they had none of these, they didn't have the synthetic fertilizer, they didn't have the chemicals, they didn't have the parasiticides, they didn't have the pharmaceuticals, on and on and on. And yet they made it, and they did very well. So I had, as a scientist, I had to begin to ask myself, wow, what are we doing? And
well,
why?
The biggest thing that I've always heard in the argument is that it increased yield, like to a way that we could never have supported the level of people we've got now. And I still hear that. Yeah, you just wouldn't get the yield, though, without the superphosphates and the things that pump things out of the ground. I'm not a farmer, so I'm not really in a position, but I do know there's a cost to that. But I would argue that I've had a lot of people talking to me about being able to get more yield without all those things now. So maybe it's other parts of science and knowledge that's come up that we've ignored in all of that.
Well, so the first thing that I will say is that yield is not a determiner of net profitability. Okay. And that's whether you're talking about livestock or crops.
Yep.
You know, the more pounds or the more bushels does not mean you're making more money.
No.
More net. You may be making more gross, but it does not mean you're making more net. If it did, then we wouldn't have farmers in debt today.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yep.
But we've got a record number of farmers in debt. So yield alone, pounds alone, does not equal net profitability. But yet we still have way too many that's been hammered into their heads that that's the only way that I'm going to make money, but they're not making money. Okay?
And do you think that they're talked into going into debt? I mean, I'm a person that's always had a major aversion to debt. I've only ever bought one property and I was like assiduously paid it off. And I've never been in debt. Don't do debt and credit cards. I just don't do it. It's not my thinking to do that. And yet people seem to live with debt. I don't know how they do it. They kind of, it's almost like it's not there anymore or something will look after. I don't know how they think with it, but I'm curious because it's much bigger debt on farms than even just a house. So, I mean, people maybe don't realize the sort of debt farmers live with. It's multi-millions of dollars.
Well, they're being told you can't farm without debt, number one. And then number two, we're making it way too easy to get into debt, including the lenders. It's way, way too easy to get into debt in farming and ranching. And
even
number
if you
three,
inherit the land. Even when you inherit the land.
Even when you inherit, there's way too many right now that inherited the land but are still deep in debt because they're multi-generational. But they're still very, very deep in debt. But the other thing that we're seeing here is that the subsidies and all of this. So way too many governments are subsidizing. And so farmers and ranchers feel like they almost feel entitled now. Okay, that, hey, wait a minute, I'm producing your food. So government, taxpayers, whoever, you have to support me. You have to.
The thing, when I talk to farmers, though, in America, I haven't come across that many that are subsidized. And I know they say it's huge, like 60% in America.
In America?
In America, something like 60%.
Oh, no, it's far more than that.
See, we've got 2% in Australia and zero in New Zealand. So it's not an area I know about, but every now and then I talk to an American farmer and they say, I have no subsidy. I don't know what they're talking about. That's only the commodity croppers or some areas. Like, it's just not an area I know too much about. But you would know a lot more than I would. Is it, how across the board is it with the subsidies?
It's very, very prevalent. And see, therein also lies the problem, is that many are taking some kind of subsidy and not even realizing it. You know, so for instance, they may be signing up for USDA NRCS programs, like what's called the EQIP program and things like that, that subsidizes the building of fences, water infrastructure, that type, or planting new seeds or whatever. And many don't consider that subsidy. See, that therein lies the rub. They don't think like participating in the EQIP program or any of these other USDA programs is a subsidy.
Do they have to pay it back?
No, they do not.
So it's free money, effectively.
Yeah, it's taxpayer money. That's exactly correct. No, you do not have to pay it back.
Right. Well, why would they not want to have that? I can understand that would be.
Well, exactly. And to get disaster payments, you know, if there's a drought or a flood or whatever, then you can apply for a disaster payment. Then there's all the insurance, crop insurance, pasture insurance. And so a lot of people are getting pasture insurance and totally taking advantage of it. The problem is you can game the system. And they're even taught how to game the system. Like I said, when you hear a lot of them say, well, I'm not taking any subsidy, I have to sort of shake my head and say, well, no, wait a minute. I can look up your name and you're on this program, this program, this program.
Right.
So it's their definition of subsidy that is the real issue.
Right. And how do you talk them out of not doing that?
Because with regenerative, we don't need it. And they begin to see things very differently. And you begin to develop a sense of pride that you're able to do this and generate your own net profits and run your own business without relying on others, government money.
Does it change their tax situation if they don't take the subsidies?
Well, yeah, you actually pay more taxes.
You pay more taxes when you don't take the subsidy.
Yeah, because now it's my money. Now it's my money, But see, that's like the vast majority of farmers in the U.S. pay little to no taxes, income tax, because. And many of them are very proud of that they haven't paid an income tax in years and years and even decades, and they're very proud of that. But what they do to not pay taxes is every year they go to their accountant and they say, well, what's my tax burden, and what do I need to spend to not have to pay taxes? So then they'll go buy equipment or whatever to not have to pay taxes. They still bought something to not pay taxes. Okay, so, but why do I need to keep buying equipment? Because equipment rusts, it depreciates, I have to carry insurance on it, repair and maintenance, all of this. So, yeah, I could play that game too. And I could just buy a bunch of equipment every year and not have to pay any taxes. But now I'm paying another way. So I'll write the check to the government. I would much rather do that than own a bunch of stuff that rusts and depreciates, and that over time I'm putting more and more money into.
How are you finding that when you talk to people? Like, how are the farmers taking to that? I mean, I could imagine a lot of farmers going, no, I'm not doing that. I want to have free money from the government and all these toys.
Well, but the problem is even with the toys and the free money, they're still in debt.
Right. That's what I'm interested in.
What I'm saying?
Why are they still in debt? It's because of the chemicals. Yeah.
Well, they're still in debt because they're spent, even in spite of the subsidy, all the payments, all the program payments and all of that, they're still in debt because they're spending too much relative to what their agricultural crops or livestock are bringing, and they're just spending too much on inputs. So
it's not easier to get them off. Like, no one likes being in debt.
Well, they don't. And there is a pride that, yes, I do pay taxes now. And I went for years without paying taxes. Okay. But now I write pretty big checks. But there's actually a sense of pride in that because I earned the money. I'm paying this tax because I made a net profit. Okay.
But why wouldn't you be able to still have access to the flood, hail? Well, you wouldn't have it down south, but, like fencing, flood you'd have. Like, why wouldn't you still have access to those subsidies without...
Well, you do. I mean, any farmer still can if they want it. Now, if it's a true catastrophe, okay, then
you take it.
But see, here's the deal, okay? If I'm farming regeneratively, drought is not going to impact me nearly as much as my neighbor.
No, but flood will. I mean, I had seen those.
It'll bounce back a lot quicker and all of that. So again, it's all about my planning. So, okay, if I have a portion of my land that'll flood, then, if we have excess rainfall and all of this, then I can pre-plan so that I don't really lose anything. My livestock are moved away from that area. I know the flood's coming. Okay, it's not like you don't know it's coming.
Well, we have floods that like flood the house up to the roof. Like we get seriously bad floods here. I mean, I'm not where I live, but
and that can happen here. In certain places, that can happen. And again, if it's a true catastrophe, then yes, if you need to take some government payments to help you with that, sure. But the problem is when all of this becomes a crutch. Yeah. And you're signing up for payments year after year after year. And now, instead of focusing on your business and building your business and building a profitable business, all you're focusing on is programs. And what programs can I sign up for? So it's a totally different mindset.
So out of the thousands that you've now worked with, how many have you got out of debt, percentage-wise, do you think?
Oh, more than 80%.
Which is a wonderful statistic when you're talking 10,000 farmers. Or I don't know what you did say. You said thousands of acres. I don't know how many actual farmers it was. But I know it's such a critical thing. From whenever I'm talking to farmers, I'm very motivated to get farmers money. That's my kind of goal in life. So I think it's wonderful to hear you getting farmers out of debt, because I think it destroys families, breaks up multi-generational farms. It's awful. And we've got the highest suicide rate in the world in Australia in farming. 2 a day or something. It's just devastating. I mean, also there's massive numbers of accidents that happen on the land because they're by themselves. But I'm very heartened to hear you making such big progress or such inroads with farmers actually taking on board what you're saying. And do you think that you've over the years modulated the way in which you communicate it to make it? I mean, what I saw you doing on the movie was just delightful, but I'm wondering how much do you think you've changed in your approach of how you access a farmer to get him to change over those years of working with different farmers and different resistances?
So you do, again, the very first thing we do is spend a lot of time delving deeply into the individual farmer's context. That is critically important. So we have to ask enough questions to be able to get that information. And again, that does include their own personal viewpoints, their risk aversion, how much debt they're carrying, because all of that's going to impact their context. And so once we've identified their real context and their full context, that's when we know how to work with them.
How to approach it.
Yeah. So every farmer is different, and there are no prescriptions in regenerative agriculture. You just can't hand every farmer the same manual.
Recipe, yeah. I agree. I'm always saying that to people. I'm always saying, well, there isn't because a lot of government, because I'm kind of working in that crossroads between business and the user at the other end, and they all want this the money people all want something you just do as a blanket. Have you got a recipe? And you give everybody the same. Because I went to COP a couple of years back, and I met with a group called the Sadhguru group that were working with soil.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And one of the guys I was talking to in the group was saying, well, I have 20,000 farmers in my particular group. And I thought, 20,000 farmers, how on the earth do you communicate to 20,000 people? He said, well, they're only doing like 1 or 2 acres each. So we kind of do it as a collective, and they're used to working as a group concept. And I thought, well, if you're only on a small number of acres, like a small body of land, even with all those people, you probably could do a prescriptive thing because you'd be in a very similar ecosystem or land mass and they're all probably doing the same thing. I don't know. Still seemed to...
See, even at that, no. And that's what we have found out, is that even if you have a small group of farmers with the same soil type, all of them are neighbors, you can't hand them a prescription, because every farm is truly different, and they're different. Not a one of them
interact with it.
Exactly. Not a one of them is going to manage the same way, okay? And then they have family or employees or whoever, right? And they're not like the family and the employees of the neighboring farm.
Right.
So we have found that the context matters no matter what.
So what do you do when you have a collective like that? So they come to you as a group.
Yep.
And they pay you as a group, and they want to be addressed as a group. How do you go about doing that? Well, 6 different projects or 6 different protocols for what they're going to do in each one.
Well, we start, the principles are the same. So with a group, or doing workshops or whatever, we're teaching the principles, right? And how to apply those principles within context. And we'll start with that group on a host farm somewhere and teach them about the context and the principles and application of them. But it really always does come down to, then we've got to work with them individually. If they're going to be truly successful, we can carry them through those first few steps as a group. And that works just fine, because we're still up here, principle, right?
Yeah, but then you're going to drill down.
Yeah, but you always have to then orient towards or pivot towards every individual farm.
So how would you do that if you had, let's say you had the 20,000 people I was talking to that I'm saying this guy had? How would you go about doing it that would you divide it up, and have you got like a team of people you'd bring over? And
absolutely. Yeah. You have to break in. Here's the truth. They're not all. So if you had 20,000 people, they're not even remotely close to being at the same stage at what they're doing. Okay. So the first thing that we do is we identify who are the key influencers.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's who we work with first and really focus on first, because then a lot of others are watching them, right? And paying attention to what they do. And as we work with those key influencers and educate and train and equip them, then 9 times out of 10, they then in turn become educators and mentors.
Right.
And then we use that. Okay. So we continue to grow the body of teachers that way. Yeah.
Do you work much at all with Elan Ingham? Is Elan Ingham's work with the soil group that they do the education of soil microbes? Do you know Elaine over there?
Well, we know Elaine Ingham very well, and certainly what she is teaching, is really good in terms of helping people to be able to recognize microbes in the soil, to quantify them, things like that. And we teach everybody that we work with the importance of the biology in the soil and how you recognize what's there. But then we carry it much, much further. Because what Elaine specializes in is just that, teaching them how to identify biology and recognize biology. But we're going way beyond in terms of teaching.
You're doing more landscape function, whole landscapes.
Right. I mean, we're working with them and saying, okay, now that you recognize and understand the biology, now what do you do with it?
Yeah.
How do you work with it within your context, and how do you continue to grow it? And grow it in the right profile. So it's not just growing biology, but I got to grow that biology in the correct profile. If I get that profile wrong, then, for instance, I can grow way too much bacteria and nowhere near enough fungi, right? So I've got to learn, how do I develop that balance between the bacterial fungal ratio in my soil? You know, those
Do you teach them to do it by observing the plants and what the plants and animals are doing in response to the land changing?
We teach them to observe the plants, absolutely. We teach them to observe the animals. We teach them to observe the insects, the birds, and the soil itself. We teach them the shovel test. So we're equipping them with things that they can do and observe on their farm on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our goal is to not have a client for life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah. Within 3 years, they better be ready to go on their own.
Right.
You know, and so we typically work with a client anywhere from 3 to 5 years on average, and then they need us a lot less after that point, and that's intentional. We don't want them dependent on us, because if they are, we failed to do our job.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And so what is your goal? Is it to educate like 10%, 100% of America, or like what are you aiming for as understanding ag, as the business?
Yeah.
You got a big goal?
And that's a very good question. But yes, to impact as many acres or hectares and as many people as we possibly can globally, not just here in the U.S., but globally. And so, you know, that's why here in the U.S., we're now on more than 37 million acres. And we're working across, you know, I don't know how many millions of acres globally. So we are making an impact, and we continue to grow that impact every year. So we're not only impacting more acres, but more people. And that goes hand in hand. And if we're going to truly change things, we have to impact as many acres and people as possible, and not be insular and only impact a few. You know,
when I did this thing where I did a little ratio of all the planet on a piece of paper, you've got 1/4 of an A4 piece of paper is the amount of land we have. And of that, it's only a business card that is the amount that we can live on, you know, and out of that, it's only 1/3 that we can crop. It's like this tiny amount, and we feel like, you know, we're everywhere because we look like we're spread everywhere. But in fact, the land, and the most extraordinary thing to me is that land that we farm, which is so small in reality to the whole planet, can so wildly devastate the entire planet's function, like because of the runoff into the water, which affects tectonic plates, which affects, like, the more you get into the science of it, the more you go, wow, that's all from just leaving that stuff running off into the ocean. That's just amazing. We can change it, because I've always been saying, you know, I think Christine Jones, who I also saw in that conference in Kansas on Gail Fuller's farm, I think it was, we were on, back in 2016, I think we were. She said back in 2006, I bought the first soil carbon credit, and back in 2006, and I was, it was her that said in her studies that it was only I'm not even going to quote the figures, but it was a tiny percentage that we had to absorb carbon-wise to change the entire planet. And we could do literally 70, we could emit double the amount of carbon that we emit right now, even with fossil fuels, if all of our global ag, went regenerative. I've been on that mission ever since. About trying to get people to understand why carbon is not a dirty word, which is why I wrote the book. and it's so wonderful to see that you're making inroads, because I've always said the Americans make much more impact. They're willing to come to the party. The Americans like to get together and come to the party. Australians are so difficult to get to come on board. So I think it's wonderful, the work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of the direction you're going, what you would like to see different, what you would like to expand with, that you, if you could change it tomorrow, what would be the thing that you'd like to have more access to? Is it money? Is it more people? Is it marketing? What is it?
The truth is, it's more qualified people, okay, to help us to join our team to teach. to educate and train. That's really probably our chief limitation, because we can't hire kids straight out of college, as an example.
But there's a retiring population of farmers that getting into their 70s plus that need to retire, that are not retiring and not handing over the land to their children, that possibly I think are the key ones to be talking to.
That's some of them. And then there's others that are, like Gabe and myself, that our farms are to the point that, Gabe's son is mostly running their farm now. My son is mostly running our farm, and so forth. And so we're able to hand it over for the most part and do what we do now.
Which is a wonderful market to be accessing. But I have to say there's not that many of them. I was talking to a farmer here in Australia, and he had a similar story to you in that he had 6 generations, and their whole history, they'd have up to 4 other families all not only earning money and earning money off the land, but also putting their kids through school, and within 10 years enough money to buy their own land. So cost of land, I think, is still a critical change that's occurred in these generations. But he didn't have either of his children want to come back. And I think that's another big thing that's occurring, is the children don't see any viability in the farm. And that's where I think what you're doing, even in this podcast, in speaking about how much more viable it is to run a regenerative farm. I don't know if you want to potentially say what sort of money that is compared to the average income for a farmer to attract a young person towards it, and how they might get in, if you want to talk about that, because we have programs here, and young farmers don't have any way of getting in because the land is too expensive. So if you have any ideas around that, that would be great to share.
Yeah, so we work quite a bit with young people and with people who are changing careers. And the truth is, we find that some of the very best regenerative farmers are those who didn't grow up in farming. They don't have the encumbrances, the baggage, the preconceived notions. So they're able to learn a lot quicker because they're not having to unlearn all the other things that they used to do.
Decades.
And we're seeing, as a matter of fact, a fast-growing number of our new farmers are those kind of people that did not grow up in agriculture. And some of the way you have to be creative in the ways that you get them started. It's really hard unless you've had another career and you've built up quite a bit of savings and investment. It's going to be really hard to go out and buy land and then get started farming. So one of the ways that we've helped people get started in this, particularly young people, is to match them up with older farmers. And many times it is exactly as you're saying. A lot of these older farmers, their kids aren't interested, but they want the land to continue in agriculture. Instead of giving it to their kids, all right, they're going out and finding somebody.
Maybe the family of the farm, even though the older guy wants to keep the young people on it, working with them and give them over a part of that land when they retire, the family fights it, because they want the asset. So I'm curious how you're navigating that part, because that does seem to be a big issue.
Well, this is where, as a parent, you have to stand up, and this is what you put in your will or in your trust. And you have to make it very, very plain and very distinct. And, that if you're not interested in farming, then I'm going to find somebody that is. And so what a lot of families have done is done other investments or bought life insurance policies or whatever, and the kids get that, but they don't get the land.
Right.
Okay. And typically what we do is, let's say that the farmer we match them up with may have been doing only beef cattle. Okay. So they help with the beef herd, but they develop their own enterprises to go along with that. So they may add poultry or sheep or pastured pigs or whatever to the same land, and the farmer is letting them do that. And they're complementary, symbiotic enterprises. Yeah. So it's benefiting the farmer with his cattle. He's growing more grass. His cattle are doing better. He didn't have to destock any cattle to add the chickens or the pigs or the sheep, And yet the young couple is building their own enterprises, their own equity, their own business, while they're learning from the older mentor.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And exactly. And then by the time that they can make a smooth transition of the land. Yeah.
And do most of those farms have a second home on them for staff? Most of those bigger farms would have two homes on
A
them?
lot of them do, yeah, yeah. And it's easy to add a home. I mean, a lot of, particularly now with the modular homes and things like that that are available, it's pretty easy to quickly add a home, for a family like that. And then some of them, rather than giving it to that young person or that young couple, what they're doing is, again, over time, they're bringing them in. They're establishing their own enterprises, their own equity. They're becoming successful. And then the owner is financing the land for them. So they're buying it over time,
Right.
and still buying the land and owning the land, but they're able to do it over time and in an affordable way,
Oh, that's
rather
great.
than immediately tying up all of their capital just in land payments alone. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, so good to hear those things happening, because I really loved the idea when I heard about it here years ago in Australia, and I saw he really, really worked hard on it and was struggling to get any purchase with it. So that's wonderful to hear it's working in America. And do you do much work at all in the desert regions? Because you mainly talked about tropics and cold regions. Do you
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah, so we work quite a bit in arid and semi-arid regions, and we have, so all of us, pretty much everybody on our staff has worked in arid and semi-arid regions, but we also have consultants on our staff that's where they actually ranch and farm.
focus?
So they know it very, very personally. So yes, we've had quite a bit of success in working in arid and semi-arid areas
Cool.
around here.
Oh, that's cool. I find it not only heartening to hear all the things that you're doing, but also wonderful to see such a diverse range of areas being addressed, and that you're also looking globally. So we've just moved into UAE, and so I'm doing. Well, that's why I keep asking about desert stuff, because not just Australia. I know a lot of people in Australia, but moving and helping and looking for stuff that might be accessible to going into the UAE is also interesting to me. So if you're looking for anybody, just let me know. That's what we do. All right. Well, look, that's wonderful. I really appreciated the talk, and I've loved talking to you and love hearing all the wonderful things that you're doing. Love to hear you working with Gabe, who's done such wonderful things like yourself in pioneering ways forward. I always think this is tip my hat to you and say, well done. That's just awesome work that you've done. So on that note, I'm going to say adieu, and hopefully we talk again at some point when I'm in America.
Well, thank you so much. I've really appreciated the opportunity to share and to learn myself.
Bye.